Tom, thanks for being here. And maybe just to get things started, you could tell our audience your name and your title and a little bit about what you do.
Well, sure. I'm Tom Sullivan. I'm the Vice President for Small Business at the United States Chamber of Commerce. I would love to say that I'm coming to you live from our headquarters, which is directly opposite the White House in Washington, D.C., but that's not the case. I'm actually coming to you live from my basement. So my commute this morning was from upstairs to the basement. And I always look at things from a half full perspective because I lobby for small business and I get that optimism from small business. And so it's just kind of a part of who I am. I think that the blessing of this pandemic, if there is such a thing, the blessing part, not the pandemic, because the pandemic is real. Uh, One of the blessings is I've gotten to visit with more local chambers of commerce in the last 9 months than in the last 5 years.
Wow.
Whether it's the Hilton Head Chamber, at 9 o'clock in the morning, to last night was visiting with the Georgia Chamber of Commerce at 7 o'clock at night. And this idea that you can connect virtually, although I do certainly prefer to connect in person. But the idea that you can connect with all of these communities of small businesses has been a blessing for me because I'm able to learn more about what's going on with small business than if I had to get on a plane and travel to Hilton Head, although I wouldn't complain about doing that, or travel to Atlanta, Georgia, or anywhere else in the United States. So I've already gone down a rabbit hole, and I apologize, Tom, but I represent small businesses at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And the Chamber of Commerce, where I work, is the world's largest business federation. We represent roughly 3 million businesses from all over the United States. 96% of our membership have fewer than 100 employees. About 75% of our membership have fewer than 10 employees. And that membership includes a partnership with about 1,600 local and state and regional chambers of commerce, as well as about 500 associations and membership organizations. Collectively, we lobby for business. I personally lobby for small business. Most of the time, we're marching shoulder to shoulder to advocate for the broader business community. And I would have to say that, well, I always have said that I have the best job at the chamber, but never has there been more important or fulfilling work than during the pandemic, because small businesses really, really need help.
Yes, and I appreciate that. And we've been a member of the U.S. Chamber for several years, and I love the work that you do and the data you publish. I love small business. It's our primary customer. It's our primary audience is the small business owner, entrepreneur, business leader. And what you have done and what you're doing as an organization, it keeps me in the loop. It keeps me informed. And so I just, as a general kind of small member in the part of the many that's part of it, appreciate it. And one of the things that I'd love to get your take on or opinion on, certainly we're in the midst of a general election season, and it's kind of lingering here. We'll see through January and the runoff that's happening. And but would you mind sharing some of the certainly with the lockdowns and the crunch on small businesses, some of the things that you've been doing to help support small businesses and what you're doing out there?
Well, thank you, Tom. So first of all, thank you for being a chamber member. You know, 3 million is a lot of members, and we use the power of numbers to certainly bring across our advocacy on Capitol Hill and in the White House and agencies. But every single member, like you, matters, and so thank you for that. Well, what have we been doing? It's weird to think that 9 months ago was kind of the start of the pandemic. I'm not sure about you, Tom, but it seems like 9 years ago.
It does.
Prior to that, when we knew that COVID would have an impact, I don't think any of us knew that it would continue to have an impact 9 months later. Actually, we just produced some data from a survey of small businesses that we can get to a little later on. But most small businesses believe the worst is yet to come, which is just crazy to me looking backwards in February, beginning of March, to think that this is what's going on. But prior to the pandemic, we were working with Congress and the White House to prepare and to put in place what types of stimulus would help businesses overall. From my perspective, small businesses. And we actually saw amazing bipartisan support of this initial bill called the CARES Act. Please don't ask me what the acronym stands for. um, and that legislation that created a brand new lending program called the Paycheck Protection Program really has paved the way to help many small businesses get this far. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is that most of the programs that were passed as part of the CARES Act were supposed to be for 3 months. Mm-hmm. So here we are 9 months later. Unfortunately, that bipartisanship has dissolved a little bit. And we're, 9 months in, we're trying to make up for lost time when the underlying foundation was a 3-month fix. So we're right in the heat of pressing Congress for more help for small business. But your question, Tom, was, well, what have you done? So we actually had to pivot almost immediately in the third week of March, because our strength traditionally has been lobbying and advocacy. Well, what we heard immediately from small businesses was, okay, we appreciate the advocacy, but how do I get a loan? How do I get my employees unemployment? There were all of these questions that were flowing in from all over the United States. Very quickly, we realized we've got to shift from being a lobbying organization to an educational institution. And so, and it really, talk about working with a great group of people. I mean, I'll never forget. It was a weekend. I think it was probably the last weekend of March. It was a Sunday afternoon, and between 20 and 30 of my colleagues at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who were working on various things that were not small business things. They were working on international things, energy things. They volunteered that Sunday afternoon to learn about the programs that are available for small business so that they could be the educators on Zoom calls, on conference calls, on WebEx calls, to help get the word out to small businesses about how to access loans, PPP loans, what to do when you reopen. What should you tell your employees? What should you tell your customers? We shifted into an information resource, and it was amazing to see the volunteerism of my colleagues where I worked, and then the execution, the pushing that information out. And when you work with 1,600 to 2,000 local chambers of commerce, pushing out information is a lot easier with those partnerships than it would be just doing it ourselves. When Mark Cuban tweeted out one of our how-to guides, that didn't hurt either. We'll take it. One of the local chamber executives said that our education initiative for small businesses was the R&D project, and the R&D stands for rip off and duplicate. and we love it. If we're gonna, if we got to get information out there in English and Spanish that would help small businesses, we want everybody to rip it off and duplicate, because then all the information gets to the folks who need it most, who are the small business owners. And so we shifted into an information resource, and there's tons of data out there about number of web likes. I think someone said that we've had 1,600 video events since March. So my mind can't even wrap around that many video events, but that's a lot of Zoom calls. And uh, if that's what it takes to get information out to small business owners, then we're up to the task. So it's been a lot of fun working in a mission-based organization like the Chamber, who really shifted very quickly to help as many small businesses as possible.
Mm. No, well, and you're doing great things. I know.
Thanks.
Yeah, we've used some of your resources. We've shared it with our audience, and
Thank
it's
you.
just been fantastic. And for anyone listening who's not familiar with the U.S. Chamber, please make sure you check them out. Get involved. They're doing great things, especially on the advocacy. Because as a small business, I know it's very common. I know I feel this way as a small business owner that your voice isn't heard, no one hears it, and having an organization like the US Chamber to help advocate on your behalf, a collective idea of representing for small businesses. So would you share a little bit about what some of that lobbying and advocating looks like? Because I don't know how, as a business owner, you're kind of, sometimes just blinders on and you're just going, you're just doing, and you forget about when you're outside of a general election season, when it's not on the news every second of every day, you kind of forget about it. You're just kind of doing your thing. So I'd love to hear your opinion or have you share a little bit about what you're doing.
Well, thank you. So first of all, I will insist with every living breath that I have that an opinion, a thank you, or an ask for us from a small business to the people they elect does make a difference, makes a huge difference. So a lot of what we do is many times just provide a megaphone. So while I walk up to Capitol Hill virtually every day, and all my colleagues do, and we convey the opinions of the business community, that doesn't move the dial as much as individual small businesses contacting their elected leaders. That's what really moves the dial. And I have been in meetings after meetings, many lately by video, where there are a bunch of people in a room, a virtual room, and the elected member's attention is always drawn to the small business in their district or their state, and as it should be. And so many times our efforts are to simply amplify what's going on in around the country. I'll give you a very good example. One of the wonderful small business owners who I get to work with every day is a gentleman from Mississippi. His name is Jeff Good, and he is lucky enough to own 3 restaurants. Although lucky is, it's all the context, because if hard work equals luck, then yes, indeed, he is lucky. Um, and he is very passionate about not just serving food at restaurants, but about the people who he employs and provides a livelihood to, and the communities in Mississippi that he's created out of Sal and Mookie's Pizza Shop, or Bravo, which was his first venture down in Mississippi. And so he wrote out a little narrative of what he went through at the end of March, and how painful it was for him to look his employees in the eye and say, "I'm sorry, but I have to let you go." And he he gave that narrative to me and some of my colleagues, and we amplified it. We got it to his congressional delegation, which, quite frankly, he had already done uh, through, I think it is the Jackson area Chamber of Commerce, Jackson, Mississippi. We then shared it with CNN, and CNN populates a website with material on it, as well as the more widely known audience on television. CNN liked it so much, not only did they publish it in their kind of opinion pieces, but they had Jeff on a video feed on a live news broadcast talking about how important it is for Congress to come together and help small businesses right now. And then we took that material, that's not actually where it stops. We took that material, pushed it out through social media. We've had 3 additional stories come out of that one. All of that is simply taking what Jeff believes, and he had the courage and conviction to say, and then amplifying it. And that's a lot of what we do. And if that's lobbying, some folks call that lobbying. If it's simply amplifying, that's okay. It's just amplifying. But our best work, in my view, comes from when we take those voices and we amplify it, not only to represent Jeff and others, but to represent millions of similarly situated businesses, and then put that in front of Congress with a solution that says, here's what you can do to help Jeff and to help this terrible narrative turn into a positive story. So that's a lot of what we do from an advocacy perspective.
Wow, that's an amazing story. And I think for the small business leader tuning in, I think knowing that that there's a way for their voice to be expressed and heard is reassuring. That it does matter. Your voice does matter for those of you tuning in. And I think for if someone's unsure what to do or how to do it, just as a talking point, how could someone get involved in reaching out to you, or what's a first step for someone that they could take?
Well, first step is go to the Google. you go to the Google and you find out who your elected representative is and who your senators are. And when you find that out, many times you'll see an email. Sometimes people prefer Twitter feed, tweeting at someone's handle. And there's really 2 rules to contacting a member of Congress: thank you and please. That's it. It's really that simple. When a member of Congress does something that you support, thank them. Or, if you want to be passive aggressive about it, you could thank them in advance. And the second, when I say please, it's okay to ask. It's okay to ask a member of Congress, please do this to help me and to help my community and to help my employees. So the please is also important. I've been in some meetings where they forget the please, and they tell a story, and then the member of Congress calls me back and says, look, I really enjoyed meeting with this person, but is there anything they wanted? And I said, I don't know. They didn't do the please part. So the thank you and the please are both very, very important. So step 1, go to the Google. Step 2, just do a thank you or a please. And then step 3, if you get to it, really is really where the community comes into play. We're powerful for a number of reasons at the Chamber of Commerce. We're powerful primarily because we've got behind us as membership, we got 3 million companies. Most of them are small. Some of them are really, really big. And when you have 3 million of those folks behind you, you can wield a pretty big stick. And that same community exists in localities all around the United States. And they are, this won't surprise you when I mention it, they are your local chambers of commerce. So that third step is to share your opinion and share the communication with your local chamber, because then they are able to coalesce other like-minded businesses and convey a broader and more powerful message, because there's likely to be more than just one of you who has a strong opinion on something. Now, if it's an opinion that you think is just going to piss everybody off, there are different ways to approach it. Doesn't mean that everybody has to be a rubber stamp for the most popular kid on the block. But there are different ways of approaching it. And that's where local chambers are so valuable as well, is that they are able to convene all sorts of differences of opinions, narrow in on a common set of agreement, and really encourage the advocacy on that common agreement, and let everything else kind of work itself out within a community, but not necessarily through a full-blown advocacy effort.
Oh, that's a great three-step process. I like it. Simple, clear, easy to understand. Thank you for sharing that. And Tom, one of the things that we like to go into our kind of our interview questions here.
Sure.
So now you're on the hot seat. This questions every guest gets asked.
Hey, let me look at my answers. They're all
Yeah.
written right there.
Yeah, yeah. And for those of you who aren't watching on the feed here, he's got his hands held up because he said he wrote them down, wrote it on his hand beforehand. So, well, Tom, we talk about this idea of misses, makes, and multipliers. And so when we talk about the idea of a miss, and it could be any kind of a miss that came up at some point and something you learned from it that maybe you could share with our audience.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, thank you for sharing some of this interview format ahead of time, because it did give me a chance to just think about something rather than just kind of fumble through a very awkward set of responses. So, I think that the misses, I'll try not to be too philosophical about it, but I think the misses for me have really been knowing or learning the distinction between knowing and learning. And what I mean by that is I was blessed to have a great upbringing, a great education, something as a parent I don't take for granted anymore, because I've got two teenage boys. And for a while, I think coming out of law school, interning in Washington, D.C. for a little while, and finding my true vocation, I had a little bit of a sense of just knowing. And I thought, well, I know it. I know the answer. Instead of what I've come to believe, which is the importance of learning. And I say that because it's a constant process. So last night, when I was speaking with some Georgia small business owners and had a chance to talk with a young lady who she's a single mom. She has 4 kids, and she has been without a job as a waitress since March. That conversation was a learning experience for me. And it is as valuable, sometimes even more valuable than what I thought I knew prior to that conversation. And you're probably looking for a little bit more of a concrete example of like, well, when did this all and I remember I was a young I had no gray hair. So folks who are listening, I can't see this, is that I am mostly gray haired now. So at the time, I had no gray hair, I was a young man, and I was a lobbyist at the National Federation of Independent Business, which represents small businesses all across the United States. And I was very excited to testify for the first time before Congress on trying to get small businesses out of a law called Superfund, which basically is a liability law that says if you contributed any garbage to a waste site that eventually becomes designated as a hazardous waste site, you could actually be responsible to pay for the entire cleanup, millions and millions of dollars. And so when I was at NFIB, we had an entire advocacy campaign that tried to recognize that a small diner who was throwing out their food scraps had a choice. They could actually pay to have their garbage sent to the landfill, or they could throw it in the stream behind the fence. And they made the right decision. They actually paid to bring it to a landfill. And then you fast forward 30 years later, all of a sudden, some government official comes knocking on that diner's door and says, "Hey, you're liable for $2.5 million to clean up this wayside." Like, that is craziness. So, in the middle of this campaign to fix kind of a misintended consequence of a law, I got to present the views of small business before a congressional committee in the House of Representatives. And I was all excited and my head was humongous because I had all this ego about, well, I am gonna tell that committee exactly how to fix this law. And my boss came to me, I'll never forget it. And he said, "Tom, I want to make sure before you go up to Capitol Hill and testify, I just want to make sure you know that the reason you're testifying is because we couldn't find a small business to be the witness." And it was an awkward several moments. Uh, and I thanked my boss at the time, but I had no idea how much that conversation meant to me, because I thought I knew, and I thought what I knew would be best communicated to Congress. But in fact, that's not the case. What actually was the value of me testifying, and the even greater value if we had found a small business instead, was to convey the actual real life experiences of small businesses in order to advocate on their behalf. And so that, for me, that was probably the biggest teachable moment, where you go from, hopefully, you go from a series of misses to a series of successes. But it's not a check the box thing. I continually need to do a better job of being a listener, both as a dad, as a husband, and as a professional, an advocacy professional. So I'm working on it.
Wow. Well, what a great story. Thank you for sharing that. And I love asking these questions because I get to learn so much, and hopefully I know our audience does as well. Well, let's turn things over to the other side. It's more fun talking about the makes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
let's bring us back up with a make or two that happened and that you wouldn't mind sharing in.
sure. So I think one of the most significant makes. So it's funny, the wall of your wall of fame, right? So I guess the way you ask the questions, you have your wall of shame and your wall of fame. So we're switching to the wall of fame, and you look at the different pictures on that wall. One of the pictures I have, I'm actually looking at, it's just in a bookshelf. It's Senator Olympia Snowe, who was a senator from Maine until she retired several years ago. She was looked uh, to by many as really an incredible champion for small business. And so there was a law called Dodd-Frank that was being written. And I think a make that certainly stands out in my mind was talking with Senator Snowe about, here's a law being created to help protect consumers. Well, the focus of that law was really regulation and enforcement. And what I had found in Washington, D.C., is that sometimes unintended consequences of regulation and enforcement really hurt small business. And so I worked with Senator Snowe to actually put into the Dodd-Frank law this provision that requires the federal government to be extra sensitive to how regulation and enforcement in the financial arena could impact small business. And so that was a huge success, but leading along the way, which had it was a little bit like a roller coaster. Part of that roller coaster, I'm not going to say whether or not this is going up or going down, because that might insult someone, but part of that roller coaster was when Senator Snow's staff said, "Hey, Tom, we think this is a great idea." And Senator Snowe is like all in on this. And she was like barnstorming around Maine, saying that this, Dodd-Frank was important, but also protecting small business is important. They said, "So we want to connect you with a Harvard professor who's fairly influential in this area." And Olympia I didn't call her that, but some of her staff did. Olympia has a very good relationship with this Harvard professor, and she just wanted to know if you could chat with her, tell her a little bit about the small business sensitivity that we're working on. So okay, sure. Yeah, who is it? And I said, oh, it's Professor Warnick or War War something Warren. I think Elizabeth Warren. And at the time, I remember like I started to sweat a little bit because she actually had gained quite a reputation already in Washington D.C. that evidently Senator Snow's staff was unaware of, uh, as being pretty aggressive when it comes to regulation and enforcement. And I said what you generally say when a senator asks for something. You say, yes, of course, I'll talk with Professor Warren. And so she connected me with then Professor Warren, who now is Senator Elizabeth Warren. And I gotta say, Tom, it was the most lovely conversation. She asked me like, hey, Olympia showed me this language and this law, but I'm not sure how it works. And so I was blessed to have served in George W. Bush's administration for a while, overseeing a law that requires the federal government to be sensitive to small business. So I knew kind of what how this law could work, and my experience with small businesses showed that implementation. It's called the Regulatory Flexibility Act, just to be a little nerdy here. So I knew from how small businesses had encountered this law, how it worked, and I just shared that with then Professor Warren. We really had a very nice conversation. At the end of the conversation, she said, "Oh, that really makes sense, and I think that's something that I could support." And I hung up the phone, and my hand was like incredibly sweaty at the time. I hung up the phone, called Senator Snow's folks back, said, "Oh, Professor Warren was lovely. We had a great conversation, and she supports the provision." And that, I think, had a great deal with it being in one of the success points of my career, that even with sweaty palms, it's still good to feel out all aspects of opinion before you declare victory. And Senator Snow was really pretty remarkable. She went to the mat for this particular provision. There's been a couple of memoirs written. I mean, she's still alive. She's doing very well. But there've been a couple of memoirs written about her Senate service, and a couple of them mention how she went to the mat for this provision in Dodd-Frank. So something I'm very proud of, and will probably always remember it.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I know small businesses are grateful for your service in helping support that, and in impacting them in ways that small business have no idea. In many cases, these things are happening, right? So appreciate that. What an incredible story! Incredible. Well, and Tom, what about this idea of a multiplier? Some guests have talked about this idea of a multiplier, maybe something they've done personally or professionally in their career. What does that mean to you?
Uh, so I have been blessed to have very good bosses.
Mm,
I really have. And so I take particular pride in trying to be a good boss. I don't know if I am or not. You're going to have to ask the people I work with. Um, but the multiplier for me is to try to take the experiences I've had and mimic them as best I can within my own personality and my own style. And probably some of the most fulfilling work that I do is to help other folks kind of find their way. So whether it's or not, it's getting an internship in Washington, D.C., or try to figure out, do I want to go to law school? Actually just talked with a young lady who I worked with about 15 years ago, and she graduated law school, and she is working for a judge down in Georgia, and she's really happy. I'm not going to say that all 15 years between when we worked together and now have been filled with sunshine and roses. That is not the case at all. But it seems as though she's in a good place now, and hearing the joy in her voice about where her life is right now, and knowing that I played a little teeny part of her choosing that path was really, really fulfilling for me. So from my perspective, the big multiplier is taking what I viewed as helping me be successful and then trying to emulate that so that others can be successful.
Hmm. Wow. Wow. And well, and I think all of us have, everyone's had a boss at some point in time. And it's always incredible. The bad ones stick out, and so do the good ones. And, I think for a lot of folks, we seem to have more bad bosses than good ones. So I understand. I appreciate that you've had the fortune or blessing to
I've had great bosses.
have great bosses throughout your career. What a great opportunity. Great opportunity. Well, Tom, the last question we like to ask every guest is, what does success mean to you?
Well, again, Tom, thank you for giving me these questions in advance, because otherwise I would just be blabbering, which I kind of am right now. But so success for me means making a positive difference in the lives of the people who I love. And so personally, that means my wife and my children and my extended family. And professionally, it's the small business owners who I represent. I mean, I get pretty worked up. I actually, in the pandemic, not uncommon for me to get pretty choked up and emotional about some of the pain that small businesses are feeling right now. But I do that because I honestly love my job and I love the small businesses who I represent. And so being able to make a positive difference, both personally and professionally, is certainly how I define success.
Hmm. Wow. Well, I appreciate that. And I can tell from speaking to you and hear it in your voice and see it on you, your love and enthusiasm for small business. And I'm so grateful for your service in supporting our small business communities out there and small businesses all over the country at a time. It always seems like we need it now more than ever. But I think now is a moment when that saying really rings true for so many small businesses out there that are, some are struggling or unfortunately going out of business, and then we have seen others that are rising through this and are prospering and doing well and are saying, "Holy cow, how do I manage the
Yeah,
growth during this time? How do we
yeah,
interview people if we don't see them, or what?
yeah.
So you have this such as big contrast of that's hitting all at the same time. It's really interesting, and I'm so grateful for you and what you're doing and what the U.S. Chamber is doing. I'm so grateful for that. Thank you.
Well, Tom, right back at you. Thank you for amplifying the voices. You are actually making a difference, both individually and collectively. So thank you for that, and thank you for having me on your show.
Yeah, well, thank you. And is there anything that you were hoping to say or get across or made a note of that you wanted to talk about that we didn't have a chance to get to, or kind of veered in another direction that you'd like to share with the audience?
Tom, I really just would like to re-emphasize a point that you brought up earlier, and that is the importance of small businesses advocating for themselves to elected officials. So not only are the stakes higher now than they ever have before, but those individual voices, who I can assure your listenership and your viewership, make a difference. Every individual small business's experience makes a difference, but it won't make a difference if it just sits inside your mind and remains silent. So thank you for helping amplify the need for advocacy. And I would encourage your listeners and viewers to advocate for themselves and utilize the thank you, the please, and let's bring these voices together through our local chamber strategy to get more help so that small businesses after the pandemic can recover in an even quicker fashion.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful and thankful, and we really appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Thank you for asking such great questions. Now I'll go wash the answers off my hands.